My fiancé was live on boys' night, laughing and joking with his friends. And in the middle of the conversation, completely casually, he said something that stopped my heart. My fiancé is such an idiot. He had no idea I was watching. For a few seconds, my hand hovered over the chat box, frozen in midair, while my brain tried to process what I had just heard. Then I typed two small words. Oh, really? The smile vanished from his face instantly. The color drained from his cheeks like someone had pulled a plug. What happened in the next few seconds of that live stream? Only Daniel and I understood what that moment actually shattered. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old, and until about 6 months ago, I believed my life was perfectly on track. I was engaged to a man I thought I understood. His name was Daniel Brooks. We had been together for 4 years, engaged for 8 months. Our wedding was supposed to happen in June. For a long time, everything about our relationship felt stable and safe, the kind of love people describe as reliable, the kind that grows slowly but lasts. Daniel proposed on my birthday at a quiet restaurant downtown. The place had soft lighting, a violinist playing near the bar, and the kind of atmosphere designed for expensive celebrations. I remember how nervous he looked when he stood up from his chair. His hands were shaking slightly as he pulled the ring box from his jacket pocket. Emily, he said, his voice unsteady but sincere, I can't imagine my life without you. When he opened the ring box, I didn't hesitate. I said yes immediately. And in that moment, sitting across from him in that softly lit restaurant, I genuinely believed I was the luckiest woman alive. Our families were thrilled. My mother cried. His parents immediately started talking about wedding venues and guest lists. Within a few weeks, my life became an endless rotation of wedding planning. Flowers, catering, seating charts, bridesmaid dresses, guest lists. The strange thing about planning a wedding is how quickly it begins to take over everything else in your life. But I didn't resent it. I was excited. I believed we were building something real, something permanent. Daniel had started a weekly live stream about 3 months before everything fell apart. He and 3 of his friends, Ryan, Marcus, and Tyler, called it Boys' Night Live. Every Friday night, they would gather in Ryan's apartment, order takeout, drink beer, and talk about whatever came to mind. Work, dating, embarrassing stories, random debates. At first, it was just a private joke between friends. Then it turned into something else. Within a couple of months, they had around 1,000 regular viewers, sometimes more. I watched a few episodes early on. Daniel seemed relaxed and funny on camera in a way he wasn't always at home. Eventually, I stopped tuning in regularly. Not because I disliked it, mostly because Friday nights were usually when I caught up on work or tried to decompress after long weeks at my finance job. If anything important happened on the stream, I assumed Daniel would tell me. At least that's what I thought. Looking back now, that assumption was the first mistake. The night everything changed was March 15th. It was around 9:47 p.m. I was sitting at the small desk in our apartment working through a spreadsheet for a quarterly analysis report. My laptop screen glowed in the otherwise dark living room. My phone buzzed beside the keyboard. A notification. Boys' Night Live has started. I almost ignored it, but out of habit I clicked. The stream opened in a small window in the corner of my screen. There were already about 2,000 people watching. Daniel was sitting on the couch between Marcus and Ryan. He was wearing the navy button-up shirt I had given him for his birthday a few months earlier, the one he told me he was saving for a special occasion. Seeing it there on the live stream gave me a strange feeling I couldn't quite explain. He looked good, relaxed, happy, actually happier than he'd seemed at home recently. The 4 of them were laughing about something when Ryan leaned toward the camera. All right, Ryan said, raising his drink. Let's ask the question everyone avoids. Marcus groaned immediately. Oh no, he said, here we go. Ryan grinned. Be honest, he continued. Are you actually dating the person you want to spend your life with? Or are you just comfortable? The chat exploded with laughing emojis. Marcus and Tyler immediately tried to dodge the question. But Daniel didn't respond right away. He leaned back into the couch and rubbed the back of his neck. For a moment, he just stared at the floor. Then he sighed and rolled his eyes. My fiancé, he said slowly, is such an idiot. The room erupted in laughter. Marcus nearly spit out his drink. Ryan slapped the arm of the couch, but I barely heard any of it. Because the moment Daniel said those words, something inside my chest collapsed. It felt like an elevator cable snapping. My fingers went numb on the keyboard. Daniel kept talking. Don't get me wrong, he said, smiling like he was telling a harmless joke. Emily's sweet. She's genuinely sweet. More laughter. But emotionally, socially? He shrugged. Sometimes I feel like I'm dating a golden retriever. Marcus burst out laughing. Ryan leaned forward with wide eyes. Okay, Ryan said. We're really doing this tonight. Daniel took a sip of his drink and shook his head slightly. She just doesn't get excitement, he said. She's happy with routine, happy with stability. He paused. Meanwhile, I feel like I'm the one constantly trying to make life interesting. The chat window was moving so fast I could barely read anything. Thousands of messages flying past. But I didn't see any of them clearly, because all I could see was Daniel, wearing the shirt I bought him, smiling, laughing, telling the internet that I was boring, that I wasn't enough. My hands moved before my brain had time to stop them. I clicked into the chat box and typed 2 words. Oh, really? For a moment, nothing happened. Daniel kept talking. Ryan was asking something about wedding nerves. Marcus was making another joke. Then Ryan's phone lit up. He glanced down at it. His expression changed instantly. His eyes widened. Slowly, he turned the phone toward Daniel. Daniel leaned forward, looked at the screen, and I watched the exact second realization hit him. The color drained from his face. His smile vanished. He stared at the camera, then at Ryan's phone again, then back at the camera. He stood up suddenly. I need to take this, he muttered. Ryan blinked at him in confusion. Daniel walked out of frame. The stream fell into awkward silence. Marcus and Tyler exchanged confused looks while the chat exploded with questions. I closed the browser tab. The apartment suddenly felt very quiet. The only sound was the faint hum of my laptop fan. I sat there in the dark living room, waiting. A minute later, I heard Daniel's phone ring in the bedroom, then footsteps in the hallway. He appeared in the doorway. His face was pale. His eyes were wide. That was you, he said. Not a question. I looked at him calmly. Yes. A long pause. How long were you watching? He asked. Long enough, I replied quietly, to hear that I'm an idiot. Daniel flinched. That's not what I meant. I tilted my head slightly. Then what exactly did you mean? He didn't answer. And for the first time in 4 years, Daniel Brooks looked like a man who had no idea how to explain himself. He stayed in the doorway for a second like he was deciding whether to walk farther into the room or turn around and disappear. I remember that detail clearly. His right hand was still wrapped around his phone. His shoulders were tense. And for the first time since I had known him, he looked cornered. Not guilty in the dramatic, cinematic way people always describe betrayal. Not defiant. Not even angry. Just exposed. Like someone had accidentally switched on a light in a room he thought was private. I closed my laptop slowly and stood up from the desk. The apartment felt smaller than usual. Tighter somehow, as if the walls themselves had been listening. You called me an idiot, I said. Daniel swallowed. Emily, I was joking. No, I said, my voice calmer than I felt. You were being honest in a room where you thought I wasn't present. That's not the same thing. He let out a breath and rubbed his forehead. It was a stupid conversation. Ryan pushed it too far. Everybody was drinking. I said something careless. Careless? I repeated. You compared me to a golden retriever. His jaw tightened. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. That almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny. Because it was exactly the kind of sentence people say when it sounded exactly the way they meant it. I folded my arms and leaned back against the edge of the desk. Then explain it to me. He looked at the floor. For a moment, I thought he would keep lying. Keep sanding down the truth into something smoother, something easier to survive. Instead, he stepped farther into the living room and sat on the couch like his legs had suddenly gone weak. I don't know, he said quietly. I don't know how to explain it without sounding terrible. I stayed standing. Normally, I would have sat beside him, softened the room, made space for the conversation to feel safer. But something fundamental had shifted inside me the moment he said those words on camera. I wasn't interested in making this easier for him. Try, I said. Daniel stared at his hands. For a while, neither of us spoke. The glow from the kitchen light stretched across the hardwood floor between us like a dividing line. Finally, he looked up. I've been feeling off for a while. There it was. Not denial. Not a joke. Not a misunderstanding. The beginning of the real thing. How long is a while? I asked. He hesitated. Maybe 6 months. I felt that number land inside me with a cold kind of force. 6 months. Half a year of cake tastings and venue deposits. Half a year of discussing table settings and honeymoon destinations. Half a year of smiling into photographs while the person beside me quietly questioned whether he even wanted me. 6 months, I repeated, and you never thought to mention that to me. Daniel looked pained now. I kept thinking it would pass. I said nothing. He went on, words coming out more quickly now, as if once he started he couldn't stop. I thought it was stress at first. Wedding planning, work, pressure, all of it at once. I thought maybe I was overwhelmed and projecting. Then every time I tried to bring it up in my head, it sounded cruel. So I told myself I just needed time. And instead, I said, you told the internet. He shut his eyes briefly. I know. No, I said. I don't think you do. The room went quiet again. He looked smaller somehow, sitting there on the couch, his elbows on his knees, his phone hanging uselessly from one hand. Before that night, I had always thought betrayal would look loud. A slammed door, lipstick on a collar, a text message lighting up in the dark. Something obvious, something sharp enough to point to. What I hadn't understood was that it can also look like hesitation, like emotional cowardice, like a man accepting your love every day while privately deciding whether it still suits him. I need you to say it clearly, I told him. His head lifted slowly. What? The truth, I said. Not the softened version. Not the careful version you tell yourself so you can still feel like a decent person. The truth. He stared at me for a long moment, and then he said it. I love you. He stopped. I waited. But, he added, his voice lower now, I don't know if I'm still in love with you. There are sentences that divide your life into before and after. That was one of them. I turned away from him and walked into the kitchen because suddenly I couldn't breathe properly in the living room anymore. I filled a glass with water from the sink, even though my hands were shaking too badly to hold it steady. Outside the window, the street below looked absurdly normal. A couple walking a dog, a car stopping at the light, somebody laughing across the street. It offended me a little that the world had the nerve to continue like nothing had happened. Behind me, I heard Daniel stand and follow me halfway into the kitchen. Emily! When did you know? I asked without turning around. He didn't answer immediately. That's not a fair question. I turned then. It's completely fair. He leaned against the doorway and looked exhausted. I don't know exactly when. I gave him a hard look. Try again. He exhaled through his nose. After the engagement, he said quietly. Not immediately, but after it settled in, after it stopped being this exciting moment and started becoming real. The wedding, the marriage, all of it. I stared at him. The engagement. I thought back to that night at the restaurant. The ring, the trembling hands, the way he looked at me like I was the center of the room. Had some part of him already been uncertain then? Had I said yes to a man who was already backing away emotionally while smiling at me across candlelight? Why did you propose? I asked. That was the question that changed his face. Until then, he had looked ashamed. Now he looked afraid. Because there was no good answer. We'd been together 4 years, he said. Everyone expected. I laughed once, a short sound with no humor in it. Everyone expected it? That's not all I mean. Then what do you mean? He dragged a hand through his hair. I thought it was the right next step. I thought maybe commitment would make me feel steadier, more certain. I stared at him. So you proposed to me hoping your uncertainty would fix itself afterward. He didn't deny it. I looked down at the glass in my hand. The water had gone still. My reflection in the kitchen window looked unfamiliar. Not broken, not crying, just stunned in a quiet, dangerous way. You should have told me, I said. I know. Months ago. I know. Before the venue deposit, before invitations, before I let myself keep believing you were excited to marry me. His voice cracked slightly when he answered. I didn't want to hurt you. That sentence made something sharp turn over inside my chest. I faced him fully. You didn't want to face being the one who hurt me, I said. That's what this was. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. You were protecting yourself from being the bad guy, I continued. So you let me keep planning a wedding to a man who was already halfway out the door. That's not fair. It's exactly fair. Silence again. The kind that stretches so tight it becomes its own living thing. Around midnight, we ended up at the kitchen table. Neither of us remembered sitting down. The overhead light cast a pale circle across the wood between us. The engagement ring on my left hand caught the light every time I moved, and every time I noticed it, I felt slightly nauseated. Daniel had stopped defending himself by then. Maybe because there was no defense left. Maybe because once the truth enters a room, everything false starts collapsing under its own weight. I didn't mean for it to happen like this, he said after a long silence. No one ever means for humiliation to happen in public, I replied. He looked down. I was venting. I almost said something cruel then. Something about how lucky I was that his honesty needed an audience. Instead, I asked the question that had been building in me for the last hour. Do you still want to marry me? His eyes lifted to mine, and he didn't answer. Not right away. That silence hurt more than anything he had said on the live stream, because if the answer had been yes, it would have come easily. Finally, he spoke. I don't know. It was strange. By then, I wasn't even shocked anymore. Just tired. Tired in the bone-deep, soul-level way that comes when reality finally catches up to denial. I looked at him for a long moment and realized something that scared me almost as much as his confession. A part of me had already begun leaving. I still loved him. That was the terrible thing. I still loved him enough to want one last chance at saving what we had. Enough to make one more effort before I let the whole thing collapse. So I asked, will you go to couples therapy? He blinked, like he hadn't expected that. You still want to try? I thought about that before answering. No, not exactly. I wanted clarity. I wanted truth in a room where no audience could distort it. I wanted to know whether this relationship was wounded or already dead. I want to know whether there's actually anything left to save, I said. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes, I'll go. Sometime close to 2 in the morning, the conversation finally ended, not because we had resolved anything, but because there was nothing left to say without repeating the same pain in different words. Daniel slept in the bedroom. I stayed awake on the couch under a blanket that smelled faintly like our fabric softener and the life I had thought was mine. At 6:12 a.m., before the sun had fully cleared the buildings outside, I sat up and called my friend Sophie. She answered on the second ring, groggy and concerned. Emily? I need a favor, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, too steady. What kind of favor? Sophie had gone through a brutal divorce the year before. Long, ugly, expensive. The kind that teaches you exactly which names to keep in your phone afterward. I need the names of the attorneys you spoke to, I said quietly. The good ones. There was a pause on the line. Then her voice sharpened with instant understanding. What happened? I closed my eyes. Not now, I whispered. Just, can you send them? Yes, she said immediately. I'll text you 3 names. I thanked her and ended the call. A few minutes later, the message came through. 3 attorneys who handled breakups, financial disputes, and shared property messes. 3 names I stared at for a long time before saving them in a folder on my laptop labeled tax returns. Just in case. That was the lie I told myself. Just in case. But deep down, sitting there in the gray morning light while Daniel slept down the hall, I already knew something irreversible had begun. And I didn't yet understand how much worse it was about to get. Couples therapy began the following week. Dr. Elaine Patterson had an office on the 8th floor of a quiet professional building downtown. The waiting room smelled faintly of eucalyptus and lemon cleaner, the kind of calm scent meant to convince anxious people that healing was possible. Daniel and I sat on opposite ends of the couch, not touching, not looking at each other, just waiting. It felt strange to sit there beside the man I had planned to marry, realizing we had somehow become 2 separate people occupying the same space. Dr. Patterson greeted us with a warm smile that felt practiced but not fake. She was in her early 50s, composed, attentive, the kind of person who had clearly spent decades listening to other people's broken lives. Tell me your story, she said after we sat down. At first, the session felt almost normal. We talked about how we met. 4 years earlier, at a friend's birthday party. Daniel had spilled a drink on my coat and insisted on buying me another one to apologize. We talked about the early days of our relationship, the comfortable routines we built together, the apartment we eventually moved into, the proposal. But the air in the room changed the moment Dr. Patterson asked the question that actually mattered. What brought you both here? Daniel glanced at me, silently offering the floor. I took it. My fiancé told 2,000 people on a live stream that I was an idiot, I said evenly. Dr. Patterson's eyebrows lifted slightly. I continued. When I confronted him afterward, he admitted he isn't sure he's still in love with me. Dr. Patterson turned toward Daniel. Is that accurate? Daniel shifted in his seat. Yes, he said quietly, but that's not the full story. What is the full story? Daniel rubbed his hands together. I do love Emily, he said. I just don't know if I feel the same way I used to. Dr. Patterson nodded thoughtfully. Do you mean the excitement has faded? Maybe, Daniel said. Or maybe I'm realizing that we're different people. Her eyes moved to me. And how did hearing that affect you? I answered honestly. It felt like finding out the person you're building a house with stopped believing in the project months ago. Dr. Patterson nodded slowly. That's a powerful metaphor. The session continued for another hour. We discussed communication, expectations, fear of conflict. Dr. Patterson asked Daniel why he hadn't shared his doubts earlier. His answer was the same one he gave me that night. I didn't want to hurt her. When we left the office, neither of us spoke in the elevator. We rode down 8 floors in silence. Therapy had opened something, but it hadn't closed anything. If anything, it had made the space between us feel wider. That week passed in an uneasy truce. We were polite, careful, like 2 strangers temporarily sharing an apartment. Then, 3 days later, something happened that made everything worse. I wasn't looking for proof, at least not at first. I was sitting on the couch scrolling through Instagram while Daniel was in the shower. He had left his phone beside me on the cushion, screen lit from a notification. I glanced down. Daniel had tagged someone in a story. Out of curiosity, I picked up the phone to see what he had posted. Instagram was already open, and when my thumb brushed the corner of the screen, the Messages tab opened. That was when I saw it. A conversation thread between Daniel and Ryan. The same Ryan from the live stream. The same friend who had laughed when Daniel called me an idiot. At first, I almost closed it. Then I noticed the date. 4 months earlier. My stomach tightened. I opened the thread. The conversation was casual at first. Memes, jokes, sports talk. Then the tone changed. Ryan had written, "So be honest, are you actually excited about marrying Emily?" Daniel's reply came a few minutes later. "I don't know, man." Ryan, "That's not a great sign." Daniel, "It's complicated." Ryan responded with a laughing emoji. Then another message. "You deserve someone who challenges you more." A long pause followed. Then Daniel reacted to the message with a heart emoji. I stared at the screen. My fingers suddenly felt cold. Scrolling farther up, I found more. Weeks of conversations. Ryan repeatedly asking if Daniel was happy. Daniel repeatedly answering with vague uncertainty. At one point, Ryan had written, "Don't marry someone just because it's comfortable." Daniel had replied, "Yeah, I know." I closed the phone slowly. 4 months. 4 months of doubts shared with his friends. 4 months of conversations about whether marrying me was a mistake. 4 months of encouragement to question our relationship. And through all of it, he never said a word to me. That night, I didn't confront him immediately. Instead, I waited. I wanted to see his face when the truth arrived in a room he couldn't perform his way out of. The opportunity came 2 days later. Our second therapy session. Dr. Patterson began with a simple question. "How has the week been?" Daniel answered first. "We've been talking more." I watched him say it. Carefully neutral, like someone trying to present progress. Then I spoke. "I discovered something this week." Both of them turned toward me. "What did you discover?" Dr. Patterson asked. I folded my hands in my lap. "Daniel has been telling his friends about his doubts for months." Daniel stiffened immediately. "What?" I looked at him calmly. 4 months ago, Ryan asked if you were excited about marrying me. You told him you didn't know." His face went pale. "You went through my messages?" I ignored the question. "Ryan told you that you deserve someone better," I continued, "and you reacted to the message." Dr. Patterson's expression sharpened slightly. She looked at Daniel. "Is that true?" Daniel ran a hand across his face. "Yes," he admitted. The room felt suddenly smaller. Dr. Patterson leaned forward slightly. "Why did you feel comfortable sharing your doubts with your friend, but not with Emily?" Daniel looked miserable now. "I didn't want to hurt her." I turned to him slowly. "You didn't want to hurt me," I repeated. "So you let me keep planning a wedding while your friends helped you decide whether I was good enough." "That's not what happened." "Then explain it." Daniel looked trapped. "Ryan was just helping me think things through," he said weakly. "Helping you think things through," I repeated, "by telling you that you deserve someone better." Daniel's silence was answer enough. Dr. Patterson let the tension sit for a moment. Then she spoke quietly. "Daniel, it sounds like your emotional processing has been happening outside the relationship." He looked at the floor. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" she asked gently. Daniel didn't answer. The rest of the session passed in strained conversation. By the time we left, something fundamental had shifted again. Not just doubt, not just hurt, something colder. The realization that Daniel had allowed an entire audience into our relationship while keeping me locked outside. That weekend, Daniel's friends hosted an engagement party. The event had been planned months earlier, before the live stream, before therapy, before everything cracked open. Daniel asked if I still wanted to go. For a moment, I considered saying no, but part of me needed to see something, needed to watch the people who had known the truth while smiling at me across rooms. So I went. Ryan opened the door when we arrived. For a split second, his smile faltered when he saw me. Then he recovered. "Emily," he said, "glad you made it." Inside the apartment, music played softly. People laughed. Glasses clinked. Friends congratulated us. I watched them closely, wondering how many of them had heard Daniel's doubts before I did. Later that night, as we drove home, Daniel sat silently in the passenger seat. He stared out the window for most of the ride. Finally, he spoke. "Tonight felt wrong." I kept my eyes on the road. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then said something I hadn't expected. Standing there pretending everything was fine. I felt my stomach tighten, because the way he said it didn't sound like guilt. It sounded like realization. And suddenly I understood something terrifying. Daniel Brooks wasn't just questioning the wedding anymore. He was beginning to understand that he couldn't go through with it at all. The drive home from the engagement party was quiet. Not the comfortable quiet Daniel and I used to share on long drives. This silence felt different. Heavy. Like both of us understood that the conversation waiting at the end of the road might finally decide everything. The streetlights passed over the windshield in slow, golden flashes, while the city moved around us, completely unaware that our relationship was quietly reaching its breaking point. Daniel stared out the passenger window the entire time. His reflection flickered in the glass with each passing light. I kept my eyes on the road. I didn't ask him to explain what he meant earlier. I already knew. When someone says something feels wrong, what they usually mean is that their conscience has finally caught up with their actions. We pulled into the parking garage beneath our building. The engine shut off. Neither of us moved. For a long moment, we just sat there in the dim, concrete space. Then Daniel spoke. "I can't do this." The words were soft, but they echoed through the car like a gunshot. I turned my head slowly. "What exactly can't you do?" He rubbed both hands over his face, exhausted. "The wedding," he said quietly. "I can't pretend anymore." Something inside me went very still. For weeks, we had been orbiting this moment, circling around it carefully in therapy sessions and late-night conversations. Now we were finally standing in the center of it. "Are you saying you want to cancel it?" I asked. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes, there it was. The final answer to the question that had been hovering between us since the live stream. For a strange moment, I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel shocked. Just a deep, quiet sadness. Because hearing him say it out loud meant the future I had imagined was officially gone. "Okay," I said. Daniel looked up, surprised. "That's it? What did you expect?" I asked calmly. "Screaming? I thought you'd have more to say." I studied his face for a second. "That's the problem," I said softly. "What?" "You expected me to keep fighting for something you'd already given up on." He looked away immediately. "The truth has a way of doing that." We went upstairs. The apartment felt unfamiliar now, like a place we had already moved out of emotionally, even though all our furniture was still there. Daniel stood near this kitchen island. I walked into the bedroom. For a few minutes, I simply stood in the doorway looking at everything. The framed photos, the half-packed wedding invitations on the dresser, the dress garment bag hanging on the closet door. A life paused mid-sentence. Eventually, I opened the closet and pulled out a suitcase. Daniel appeared behind me. "You're leaving?" "For a while," I said. "Where will you go?" "Sophie said I can stay with her." He nodded slowly. That name again. Sophie had become my quiet safety net during the past few weeks. She never pushed for details, never demanded explanations. She simply kept reminding me that I deserved clarity. And if clarity meant leaving, then leaving was allowed. Daniel watched as I began folding clothes into the suitcase. "I never wanted it to end like this," he said quietly. I stopped packing. Then I turned around. "That's the second time you've said that." He looked confused. "You said the same thing after the live stream," I continued. "And yet here we are." He didn't respond. Because what could he say? There was no defense left. Just two people who had slowly drifted into different emotional worlds without admitting it until it was too late. "I loved you," Daniel said suddenly. The past tense hit harder than anything else. Loved. I studied him carefully. "You probably still do," I said. "But love isn't always the same thing as commitment." He nodded slowly. "I guess not." I finished packing my suitcase. The zipper closing sounded louder than it should have in the quiet room. Daniel stood there as I carried the suitcase toward the door. Neither of us cried. Neither of us shouted. Sometimes endings don't explode. Sometimes they simply settle into place like a door quietly clicking shut. At the doorway, I paused. Daniel looked at me. "What happens now?" he asked. I thought about that. For months, our lives had been built around a wedding. Now there was just empty space where that future used to be. "I'll call the venue tomorrow," I said. "We'll cancel the reservations." He nodded. "I'll talk to my parents." "I'll tell mine." Another pause. "We should probably sort out the lease deposits and shared expenses too," he added. The practical side of separation. Canceling contracts. Untangling finances. The strange administrative work required to dismantle a shared future. "Yeah," I said quietly. "We should." He walked me to the door. When I stepped into the hallway, something strange happened. For a second, Daniel looked like he might reach for me, like muscle memory was about to override everything else. But he stopped himself. And that was when I truly understood it was over. Because if love still had enough gravity, his arms would have moved before his brain could stop them. Instead, he just stood there, watching me leave. Sophie opened her front door before I even knocked. She pulled me into a hug immediately. "You don't have to explain anything tonight," she said gently. "Just come inside." Her house smelled like fresh coffee and laundry detergent. Warm, safe, human. I slept in the guest room that night and woke up feeling like I had aged 10 years in a single evening. The next month passed in a blur of logistics. Canceling the wedding venue, refund negotiations, explaining things to friends and family. Some people were shocked. Others quietly admitted they had sensed something was wrong. Daniel and I handled the separation surprisingly calmly. There were no screaming arguments, no courtroom drama, just paperwork. We officially dissolved the engagement. Daniel returned the ring to me, and I sold it later. We divided the apartment deposits and shared expenses proportionally. Furniture was split with almost surgical precision. By the end of the process, our shared life had been reduced to neat financial columns. Debits, credits, balances. 6 weeks later, I moved into a small condo across town. The first night there felt strange. No familiar footsteps. No shared routines. Just quiet. But it was a peaceful quiet. not the tense silence that had filled our old apartment during those final weeks. One afternoon, about 2 months after I moved out, my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. Would you be willing to meet for coffee? I stared at the text for a long moment. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but another part understood something important. Some relationships don't end cleanly without one final conversation. So I replied, okay. We agreed to meet at a small cafe near our old neighborhood, the place where we used to buy pastries on Sunday mornings. The familiarity felt strange now. When Daniel walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. He looked thinner, tired. The confidence he used to carry so easily seemed worn down. He sat across from me at the small wooden table. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said something I didn't expect. I owe you a real apology. Daniel sat across from me at the small wooden table, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup he hadn't taken a single sip from. I owe you a real apology, he said. The cafe around us buzzed quietly with normal life. A barista steaming milk, 2 college students arguing softly about an exam, someone laughing near the window. The ordinariness of it all felt surreal considering the conversation unfolding at our table. For what exactly? I asked. Daniel let out a slow breath. For everything. He looked down at the coffee. For the live stream. For humiliating you like that. For not being honest earlier. For letting things get that far when I already knew something was wrong. I watched him carefully. The Daniel sitting in front of me now looked very different from the man who had laughed with his friends on camera months earlier. There was no arrogance in him anymore. Just fatigue. I've been seeing a therapist, he continued quietly. Individually. That surprised me a little. Why? I asked. He gave a small, sad smile. Because I didn't understand why I handled everything the way I did. He finally took a sip of his coffee before continuing. My therapist said something during our second session that stuck with me. What was it? That I was avoiding difficult conversations because I was afraid of disappointing people. I leaned back slightly in my chair. That sounds accurate. Daniel nodded. I kept telling myself I didn't want to hurt you, he said. But the truth is, I didn't want to deal with the guilt of being the one who ended things. He looked up at me. So I delayed it. I kept hoping the feeling would pass. I stirred my own coffee slowly. And instead you let the doubt grow. Yeah. And you told your friends about it before you told me. He winced slightly. I know. There's a strange emotional exhaustion that happens after a breakup. At some point, anger simply runs out of energy. It fades into something quieter. Sadness. Acceptance. Distance. I'm sorry, Daniel said again. For the live stream especially. That should never have happened. I thought back to that moment. His face on the screen. The casual laugh. The word idiot floating through the room like it meant nothing. It was strange how distant it felt now. Like watching a scene from someone else's life. I believe you're sorry, I said. Daniel looked relieved for a moment. Then I added softly, but apologies don't rewind time. His shoulders sagged slightly. I know. We sat there quietly for a few seconds. Then Daniel said something else. I was scared. Of what? Of getting married and realizing too late that I'd made the wrong decision. I nodded slowly. That's a real fear. I thought maybe the excitement would come back, he said. That the closer we got to the wedding, the more certain I'd feel. But the opposite happened. Yeah, the honesty between us now was strange. Back when we were together, conversations like this never happened. Now that the relationship was over, the truth felt easier. I let my friends' opinions influence me more than I should have, Daniel admitted. Ryan kept saying I deserved someone more exciting. I raised an eyebrow. And that didn't bother you? At the time, he said. No, it validated the doubts I was already having. And now? Daniel looked genuinely ashamed. Now it just feels immature. I nodded, because that was exactly what it had been. Immaturity. Emotional cowardice. Not betrayal in the traditional sense. Just someone too afraid to face his own feelings until they exploded in the worst possible way. Emily, he said carefully, I hope someday we can be friends. That sentence hung between us for a moment. Friends. It sounded almost absurd considering how our relationship had ended. But strangely, I didn't hate the idea. Not yet. Not now. Just not today. I think I need more time before that, I said gently. That's fair. Daniel looked out the cafe window for a second. Then he turned back to me. You deserve someone who was completely certain about you. That sentence landed softly. Not painful. Just true. And you deserve this chance to confront your doubts before getting married, I replied. He looked surprised. You're not angry anymore? I thought about that question carefully. I was, I said. For a while. And now? Now I'm mostly just grateful the truth came out before the wedding. Daniel blinked. He stared at the table for a second, then gave a small nod. You're right, he said quietly. Eventually we finished our coffee. The conversation slowed. There was nothing left to resolve. No dramatic reconciliation. No emotional collapse. Just two people acknowledging the end of something that had once meant everything. When we stepped outside into the parking lot, the afternoon sun was warm and bright. Daniel looked at me for a moment. Then he stepped forward and hugged me. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't desperate. It was simply the kind of hug two people share when they understand their lives are moving in different directions. "Take care of yourself," he said quietly. "You too." Then we walked to our separate cars. And just like that, the chapter officially ended. But the story wasn't completely finished yet, because the internet had seen everything. And the internet, as it turns out, never forgets. It's been about 5 months since the live stream. 5 months since 2 words in a chat box quietly detonated the life I thought I was building. A lot can change in 5 months. The first few weeks after moving into my new condo were strangely quiet. Not lonely exactly, just unfamiliar. When you spend 4 years sharing space with someone, silence takes on a new personality once they're gone. At first, I would catch myself listening for Daniel's footsteps in the hallway, or the sound of the shower running in the morning, or the low murmur of his voice during one of his late-night gaming sessions. Those sounds never came. Instead, there was just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing outside my window. But slowly, that silence began to feel different. Not empty, peaceful. The condo itself was smaller than the apartment Daniel and I had shared. 1 bedroom, a modest kitchen, a narrow balcony that overlooked a row of maple trees. But it was mine, completely mine. Every piece of furniture was there because I chose it. Every quiet evening belonged to me. Work helped too. My finance job had always been demanding, but during those first months after the breakup, I leaned into it more than ever. Spreadsheets, quarterly reports, late nights reviewing projections. Numbers have a way of grounding you when emotions feel chaotic. They follow rules. They behave logically. Relationships rarely do. Through mutual friends, I occasionally heard small updates about Daniel. Nothing dramatic. He wasn't dating anyone. He'd stopped doing the live stream. Apparently, the clip of him calling me an idiot had spread online after the breakup. Someone had screen recorded it before the stream was deleted. Within days, it was circulating on social media. People argued about it endlessly. Some viewers defended him. Others criticized him. A few went after Daniel personally in the comments. Eventually, the entire Boys Night Live series shut down. The comment sections had become too toxic. Daniel told me during our coffee meeting that he regretted starting the stream in the first place. At the time, it felt like harmless entertainment. In reality, it had turned our private relationship into public content. And once the internet sees something like that, it never really disappears. As for me, I've gone on a few dates. Nothing serious. Just dinner, coffee, long conversations with people who don't know my history yet. At first, dating again felt strange. Almost like learning a language I used to speak fluently but had forgotten. But there's something refreshing about starting without expectations. No wedding planning, no timelines, no pressure, just curiosity. One evening, about a month ago, I was sitting on my balcony watching the sun drop behind the buildings across the street. The sky had turned that soft golden color that only lasts a few minutes before fading into evening. And suddenly a thought occurred to me. If I hadn't clicked that live stream notification, if I had ignored it the way I almost did, I would probably be married right now, living in the same apartment, planning a honeymoon, building a life with someone who wasn't fully certain about being there. That realization didn't hurt. It actually made me feel strangely calm, because as painful as that night had been, it forced a truth into the open. Without that live stream, Daniel's doubts might have stayed hidden until much later. Maybe after the wedding, maybe after years of quiet resentment. Instead, everything surfaced in one brutally honest moment. It saved both of us from something worse. Sometimes people ask me if I regret typing that message. Those 2 simple words. Oh, really? I always give them the same answer. No, I don't regret it at all. Because in that moment, I stopped being the last person in the room to know the truth about my own relationship. And that matters. What I've learned since then is something I wish someone had told me years ago. You can't fix someone's lack of commitment by being more committed yourself. You can't love someone into certainty. And you definitely can't build a future on silence and avoidance. Real relationships require honesty, even when that honesty is uncomfortable, especially when it is. Daniel and I weren't bad people. We were just 2 people who reached a point where love and certainty no longer moved at the same pace. And once that gap appears, no amount of wedding planning can close it. The last time I saw him was that afternoon in the cafe parking lot. We hugged. We wished each other well. Then we drove away. I don't know where life will take him. And honestly, that's no longer my responsibility. What I do know is this. Sometimes the worst moment of your life, the one that humiliates you, shocks you, breaks something you thought was permanent, is actually the moment that sets you free.